Lawmakers recently passed an increase in New York State's minimum wage, which many feel is good for wage earners and our local economy. But others disagree. We'll discuss that issue along with other issues of local interest with Senator John Defrancisco. Hi, I'm Daniel Pluff. Join me on the next Central here on Fox 68 and My 43. Lawmakers recently passed an increase in New York State's minimum wage, which many feel is good for both wage earners and our local economy. But others disagree, citing just the opposite. We'll discuss that issue along with other areas of local interest and hopefully get an update on ethics reform in Albany. All that, but first, welcome to this edition of Central here on Fox 68 and My 43. I'm Daniel Pluff. Glad to be continuing the series with you. And who better to talk about these issues of local interest and how we're impacted by Albany than our own state senator? We're very happy to welcome to the studio Senator John Defrancisco, who, as we were just chatting before we went on, almost 25 years, a quarter century as our state senator, 40 years in public office. I won't say what you said about that, but that was all good. Just so people know, you represent just about all of Onondaga County, a portion of the city of Syracuse, and I believe a portion of the city of Auburn.
Correct. Part of Cayuga County, a couple of the towns there too.
Okay. Almost, by the way, and I think a disappointment for our area, but almost became the Senate Majority Leader a little bit earlier. Probably would have been better for us if that had happened, but so it goes.
I think so.
Yeah, well, you know, and running unopposed this November, correct?
I don't know. I haven't.
Can I announce my candidacy with you right now?
You can do whatever you choose, but I haven't heard of anyone yet. But there's always time.
Senator, I always tend to over-prepare for these types of shows, and closer we got to air date and where I was thinking about new issues to ask you. I don't know how we're going to get it all into 20-some-odd minutes, but a couple of things I hope we can talk about. Number one, the whole budget process, how it's prepared, how it's voted. But quite frankly, a bit of a mystery to me in some respects. I do, with respect, want to get an update on the whole ethics reform in Albany. It's on voters' minds, you know that. And maybe if time allows, a little bit on 81, the Upstate Revitalization Initiative. There's enough to talk about.
Well, we better get started.
I know. So quiet, right? I was anxious to get you in here, though, because the New York State raised the minimum wage, and that was kind of a hot topic, and I think it still's got some buzz out there because people are very mixed on this. If I'm correct, by the end of this year, minimum wage for upstaters goes to $9.70 an hour and then graduates up?
Graduates up to $12.50 an hour, as opposed to downstate where it graduates up in 3 years rather than 6 years, but it goes up to $15 an hour in 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, you can, this is probably the most predicted question of the interview, but you were pretty much out in front of this issue. You were opposed to it. Some would say you were somewhat vilified for a while as being someone who wasn't for a living wage for people and all of that. Tell us why you were opposed to it, and if you would, Senator, I know that you later did vote yes. Connect those dots.
All right, first of all, on the budget process, what we have done for the last 24 years, that the Republican conference that I'm a part of meets continuously during the budget process. And it's just almost like labor negotiations. You don't have the entire labor union at the table when negotiations take place. Mm-hmm. So when you say 3 men in a room is all people do, it's not really like that. The Assembly and the Senate majorities are conferencing, explaining to the leader what their positions are. And then ultimately that person goes to the table to negotiate the best deal you can possibly get. With respect to minimum wage, I was definitely against that. Mm-hmm. And my logic was this: minimum wage has never been a living wage. It's never been the situation. It's been a wage, for example, that part-time workers obtain, or summer workers and things like that. Mm-hmm. And we just passed 3 years ago a minimum wage increase that over the 3 years ending December 31st of 2015 resulted in a 24% increase, mm-hmm. which is 24% higher than the federal minimum wage before we raise it again this year.
So in an effort to try to bring both sides of this in, because I've got a little bit on the negative, a little bit on the positive, here's maybe something that's in favor of raising the minimum wage, and you can respond. But some would say, upstate in particular is struggling. And they'll claim that a low-wage economy leads to continued poverty. And you, probably second only to Stephanie Miner as our mayor, know that we have a poverty problem in the city of Syracuse. Won't this help?
Well, it'll help if every employer is going to keep employing the same number of people.
There you go.
It won't help very much if employers have to fire people, or in the case of fast food restaurants, automate so they don't have the people taking the orders and you press buttons. Or there's other alternatives that employers have. Employers have a basic philosophy, I think. If you can't make money, you get out of business, and it's going to lose some businesses as well. So that's what the real issue is about.
And there's some studies on that which maybe we can reference. But one other thing on the positive side, I read a report by, I think it was the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, something of that nature, which gives you some insight as to what I read in my spare time. But they were saying in 1970, the minimum wage was around $1.83. It had the highest purchasing power at the time. And that $1.83 bought more goods and services than ever before since, apparently, according to the study. If you follow their math, they're saying that the minimum wage should be about $11.31 right now. So technically, we're still below that, if you follow that logic.
You can follow any study you want. I can get you a study to say anything you want to have it say. And there's just as many, if not more, studies that say that's absolutely incorrect. But in the real world, in citing minimum wages, especially when you're in an economy that's not confined only to New York State, that farmers are competing with farmers in Pennsylvania, when they're already, before we started this debate, were earning a minimum wage 24% less. And other states, the same thing. You're competing with other states. So you got to look at it not just in a philosophical term, you got to look at it what it means practically, economically.
And part of the another side of the negative is, and I think you were alluding to this, but other studies, and there's enough of them out there, clearly, say that when we raise the minimum wage, prices in turn go up. It costs more to do things and buy things. And that increase in price tends to negatively impact, to a greater degree, those folks who are earning minimum wage. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So another negative there.
Well, that's why I was against it, and that's why we fought. The group of people in the Senate, in the Republican conference, fought against it all the way to the final days. And the best that could be done during the negotiations was separate upstate from downstate and have it a lesser minimum wage and phase it in over a longer period of time. But still, you asked, I voted yes. What we do, just like any other team, we debate the issue, we fight the issue, we try to convince everybody else. But when you get a majority who's satisfied with the ultimate face of what the budget is, the majority determines what the negotiations are going to look like.
So a couple more points on this. Educate me on this. I'm sure you'll get your share of emails and letters from time to time. We get a few here at the studio. A gentleman, I can't put his name up or anything because he's worried about, you can imagine, but he's a taxi cab driver in the city of Syracuse. And he says in his long note to me, if you don't mind me reading it, he says, when Governor Cuomo is pushing to give all fast food workers $15 an hour, and Mayor Minor, he quotes, is pushing city workers to get the same, he says, we airport taxi drivers are still getting paid just $7.25. So the minimum wage is not across the board, apparently, if this gentleman's correct.
It wasn't across the board until this new budget passed. Now it's across the board.
He will get the increase.
He will get the increase.
Okay.
If he's an employee, if he's self-employed, his wage is going to be whatever he can afford to pay himself. But yes, he would participate. I probably know who the taxi driver is.
Oh, okay. He said he's written to a few. Maybe, okay. We get it. I thought I'd pass it on. We sat down also earlier this week, and I brought in an individual who's been in the restaurant and food service business for a long time, Neil Pascal. He and his brother, restaurants, banquets, etc., because he had some thoughts on what happens to that industry, his industry, when the minimum wage goes up. I wonder if we can play this and then come back and talk about it.
Sounds great.
All right, let's take a look, Senator. Neil Pascal, thank you so much for joining us. You and your brother Chuck, along with partners over the years, have owned and operated a number of restaurants here in the Syracuse area. Welcome to the program. I've got a couple quick questions for you and appreciate your time. 35 years you guys have been in the restaurant business, and I mention that because this has not been a one and done. You've gone through a number of ups and downs, different market conditions, environments, recessions, etc. But Neil, it occurs to me that with this increase in the minimum wage, this could be a major hurdle for people like you in the restaurant business.
Regarding minimum wage, I believe minimum wage is really based on subsidizing the poor or families of New York City. the economy of Central New York is equal to the economy through 90% of the country. And increasing the minimum wage in upstate New York, I really feel will eliminate a lot of jobs.
Why can't you just pass on some of those extra costs that you're going to incur to the folks coming in the restaurant?
Initially,
We're used to it, by now.
Initially, that seems like an easy fix, but 7 out of 10 restaurants fail. And the reason they fail is because they don't understand the market. And after 34 years, we were in a fine dining restaurant with tuxedoed waitstaff in 82 to 92. 92, we were in downtown Syracuse. There was a much larger corporate base for tablecloth restaurants. And as the market and the industry has changed, we've been fortunate to make the changes. But when it's mandated by government to increase the wages to the servers, most servers, if you include the gratuities, are making probably $25 to $30 an hour.
The servers, as you call them, were making $5 an hour. That's gone up to $7.50.
Correct.
50% increase.
It's a 50% increase. Minimum wage in New York State went from $8.75 to $9. And the servers got a 50% increase, $5 to $7.50. And as it typically in the restaurant industry, your labor cost should be 30% to 32% of your gross sales. By this increase, it's driving it up close to 40%. Most small independent restaurants can't absorb that, nor can they pass it on.
Which, excuse me, leads to the burning question I've been meaning to ask you. In your 35 years in the restaurant business, you've moved, you've redesigned, you've changed the wallpaper, but you've never closed a restaurant, correct?
Correct.
You had a restaurant in Fayetteville that you recently sold, and my question, Neil, is how much did this increase in the minimum wage influence your decision to close that restaurant?
The impact the minimum wage had on that particular restaurant, because it's a 100% a la carte. It doesn't have the banquet facilities that Justin's Grill in East Syracuse does, or Drumlin's Country Club that we also operate in Syracuse has. The banquet business is able to offset because there's a different style of paying the banquet servers. The increase there would have cost between $65,000 to $75,000 in additional labor, and accompanied with Obamacare, it would have brought up the overhead by well over $100,000.
Okay. Even in the restaurant business, or any business, we don't mean to discriminate any business here, but don't you think that workers overall are entitled to some type of a living wage? I mean, that's the buzzword I get out there.
I do agree. Everyone should be capable of having a living wage. The culture in our country is that I would estimate that 90% of the servers that work in restaurants throughout the state of New York and throughout the country are part-time employees. And are we better off having 500 people working at $15 an hour, or are we better off having 2,000 people working at $9 an hour?
In your professional opinion, do you foresee other independently owned and operated restaurants in the central New York area facing financial trouble and or closure as a result of the minimum wage going up?
I think that it's just a matter of time within the next year or two before other small restaurants, independent, family-owned restaurants decide to close because they're not going to be able to absorb the cost.
Continued good luck to you in the business. Thank you, Neil, for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
You know, Senator, in watching the clip, and we were chatting a little bit, I'm going to come back to something you said during the clip, but first, as I'm listening to that, I can't help but think back during the financial crisis we had 2008. A lot of things took place, a lot of things were put into place and happened, and as a result we had this phenomenon called unintended consequences. And I can't help but think that that doesn't apply here. You know, you want people to earn more money, but in bumping up that wage, there are some unintended consequences.
Well, of course, it's unintended, but it certainly was known. I mean, this was debated. concerning this issue. You're going to have more jobs or less jobs. You're going to have how about kids' summer programs?
Well, you spoke during the clip, and one thing I did not think about, and I apologize, but the nonprofits are also going to be negative. They're all struggling to raise cash, and this is another burden.
As I was arguing against this, we had a news conference, and nonprofit Elmcrest Children's Center. They have a lot of children, a lot of minimum wage workers, but they estimated that if this went into effect to $15 an hour, it would mean $2 million more in cost to them because they have a phenomenally big facility. Where's that money going to come from?
Yeah, I don't know.
Daycare centers. Yeah. They can't just cut employees because you have to have so many employees per child.
Right.
It would increase their cost for two kids from $10,000 a year to $16,000 a year.
So I'll now wrap up quickly. I don't want to beat you, but I did such an important issue. But let me just get in your head for a minute. No one's going to accuse you of saying, well, I'm not for a living wage, whatever that means. You want people to do well and prosper. But tell me why do we set some limits on that minimum wage? In any other part of the employment spectrum, wages are set by the market. An attorney gets paid what the market will bear. A physician gets paid what the market will bear. Why do we do it this way on the lower end?
Well, I think there's at least some minimum wage that people should get to do certain types of employment. This has been the case in the United States for tens of thousands. I don't know how many years.
But if you follow that logic, then what's the right number, right? Is it $9.70 or $15?
Well, you get the right number by doing an economic analysis, and that's what we did when we raised it the last time over a 3-year period, up to $9.25 an hour. That inflation has gone up, the cost of living, that type of thing. Maybe this is the minimum we should be. In this period of time, the last 3 or 4 years, in fact, we've had virtually no inflation.
Right.
So correct. How do you increase a minimum wage over a 3 or 5 year period by 67%?
Okay, last one, because you brought it up, the notion of automation. You're seeing it all over already. You go, the woman behind the Eastern Airlines counter is gone. You use a kiosk now, and it's across the board. Higher wages, particularly on the minimum wage side with fast food restaurants. We could see more automation there.
There is. In the West Coast, I think it was in the state of Washington when they raised the wage to $15 an hour. You don't see a person to give your order. Maybe you don't need to. You don't see a person to give that order.
Put it on an iPad.
Put it on a machine of some type of kiosk. And what that means is some people who were previously employed, maybe at a lower wage, aren't employed any longer.
Right. So this leads in, thank you. It kind of leads in, though, if minimum wage does go up, some will argue, well, it's going to be even more difficult in New York State to do business, higher costs. I read another report, came out late 2015, last year, from CNBC Global Council of CFOs, and they ranked New York State as 44th in the country in terms of having the highest state to do business in. How is that, improving? What are we doing about that? What's your take on all of that?
Well, first of all, I've seen reports that make it even lower, either please. 48th or 49th. And that's precisely one of the arguments that I was using as we were going through this process. If you think you're going to compete, farmers came up and talked about the farming situation. We compete with Pennsylvania. They got a minimum wage of $7.25.
We're a big agricultural state.
Exactly, and so how do you compete under those circumstances? So that's the issue. I think if there was an economic analysis done, which there wasn't, and if it showed that the cost of living is greater and we've got to be fairer to the lowest paid employees, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But just coming up with an arbitrary $15 an hour, which, by the way, was really set by the advocates throughout the country who wanted an increase, and that was the wage they came up with.
I got to get some good news out of you. I mean, locally, what do you see happening that's more positive? I mean, there's some great stuff happening downtown.
Well, I think from a standpoint of the city of Syracuse and County of Onondaga, a lot of things have been happening in a positive way. For example, downtown housing is just skyrocketing. You can't get an apartment
they keep building.
downtown. And they keep building, and which is positive. Once you get people downtown,
exactly,
everything else seems to happen.
I've noticed it.
Yes, and that's huge. And you've got more hotels downtown, and in Onondaga County, there's things that are happening that now, whether you agree with the amount of money that was spent for the the theater on
The amphitheater?
On Onondaga Lake. There's a lot of activity in the arts.
County executive sat where you were. She's quite proud of that, and so far so good, I would think.
And in Salve, there's a ton of money being put into the state fairgrounds, as well as the surrounding area for Salve. And there's the inland port that's going to be
that's still being discussed, right?
It's
You'll
close.
come back.
It's
So
close.
we're in the lightning round here. I was going to do an entire show on the whole medical marijuana thing. Seemed like such a big issue at the time. Kind of faded out. Question, is medical marijuana in New York State going to be the revenue generator that we hope for, or what do you think?
The review, first of all, I voted against it.
You did?
Yes. But I just think that it's a mixed message when you're talking about a drug problem in this state. From
DA Bill Fitzpatrick was on, said that's the first step to legalization.
It's, of course, and then some feel that that's the next step for a person is going into an illegal drug. So I don't know who's correct, but that's my position. And the reviews on it so far is the complaints have been that it hasn't been set up quickly enough and people can't get the medicinal marijuana. Ironically, yesterday in Albany, a group of people came up to talk to me about an issue totally unrelated. It had to do with election reform. They were from Colorado. And I asked them if they were potheads, now that they have the ability to smoke pot. And I said, what's the effect been? Has there been a lot of people just roaming around the streets? And he said, well, we haven't seen that yet, but there's a lot of revenue that came out of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Whether we're going to have the same experience, I don't know.
So, regrettably, two of the key, top-ranking officials in Albany have been stepped down, being sentenced, etc. Sheldon Silver, Dean Skelos. When we look at polls conducted and the voters speak their minds, time and again we see a major issue is reform of Albany. I mean, people just have such a negative opinion of what goes on down there. Can you tell me things are better as a result of the Moreland Commission and everything else that's taken place?
Well, they're not better because of the Moreland Commission. That did basically nothing. It was disbanded by the governor before it was completed. That's number one. With respect to whether it's better or not, over the years we've been doing substantial reforms, and which now we're at the point where there's so much disclosure that's required. Today I was working on this year's disclosure of my financial status, and the only thing I don't have to give the information is on that is the color of the eyes of my children and grandchildren. And it's everything you got to bear to the public. In fact, it was used in this minimum wage dispute on a commercial that I'm the $6 million man.
I did see that.
And therefore I have no sensitivity whatsoever to anything. But what I think as far as whether there's good laws in effect now, the two most powerful people in state government, the leader of the Senate and the Assembly, have been convicted of felonies. And one has been sentenced, the next is going to be sentenced. Now, it seems that in order to get those convictions, there'd have to be enough laws on the books. In fact, Silver's main problem was that he was convicted of not properly disclosing some of these things, and then it came out, and that was the initial movement as far as the investigation was. So there's plenty of laws on the books right now, and there could be some more tweaking.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, when people say you need more ethics reform, the laws are on the books. If someone's doing something, and right now the governor is being investigated.
Yeah, exactly. But net we're better.
Net we're better because the laws that were on the books are being enforced.
You, as I mentioned earlier, you probably get some emails and letters from time to time. We get a few at the show. Sit with me just a minute. I want to read a couple on shows we've had, and then I want to come back to you with one last question before we wrap up. But I do encourage all of you to send us your comments, particularly on the senator, after we have this. But a couple of comments came in on recent shows that we did. You might recall we kicked off the whole Central series with a one-on-one interview with head basketball coach Jim Boeheim, and I will say, not surprisingly, the comments were overwhelmingly positive on that interview. Here's one from a viewer in Saratoga Springs who says, Dan, great interview with Coach Jim Boeheim. He seemed at ease and was more open than usual. It was good to see a different side of him. I agree as well. We talked a little basketball, of course, as well as some other issues, but we go downhill from here, of course. County Executive Joni Mahoney came on, and Bill from North Syracuse wrote, Mr. Pluff, I suggest you go back to your financial interviewing. You aren't capable of rebutting Miss Mahoney's crazy responses, quote. Her answers were, in general, too much for you to rebut. Well, Bill, I actually did watch the show. I didn't think her answers were crazy, but we appreciate the comment, and your opinion matters.
Can I mention something at this point?
Oh, of course you could.
The thing you should consider is that the only people that don't get criticized are those that don't do anything.
Well,
so don't be worried about the criticism.
Here's another bad one, though. With our interview with DA Bill Fitzpatrick, interesting interview with Mr. Fitzpatrick. He's a great prosecutor. Even though I disagree with your line of soft questions about the issues, he answered as he always does. Next time, Dan, ask the tough questions and get the hard answers we're interested in. But he did say nice show at the end. Again, thank you for the letter. I thought that was one of the more candid interviews we did. And then finally, we did a special show on concussions, high school and college level concussions. This came in, I thought it was important. I suggest Mr. Pluff follow up with some actual concussion patients. It's obvious that your guest lacked the experience to understand some people never fully recover from concussions. Dr. Rieger and Mark Powell, who were on that show, excellent guests. They understood that issue very well. We couldn't get someone in here with a concussion because we don't have enough time, so that's the way it goes. But again, thank you for the comments, and I'll tell you how to do that. Lastly, I know that you're working on some legislation, which is near and dear to you, the murder of this baby Maddox, as well as maybe toughening, if that's correct, toughening the laws on DUI or DWI on issues away from automobiles, correct? Are those two items right now?
Yes, two totally different issues.
Exactly.
But I can explain either one if you like.
Sure.
Okay, as far as baby Maddox, when you have the father kidnapping, at least according to the indictment, a child and then murdering the child, we don't have murder in the first degree any longer because murder in the first degree was that would accommodate a death penalty because the death penalty is illegal in the state of New York. But on the other hand, the sentencing on various death cases, in many cases, depends upon the victim. If it's a police officer, then you could be served life without parole. And there's other people in those categories. I believe, and this is what the bill does, that that killing of a child, I took the arbitrary figure of 12 years old, should be in that category. That's a heinous crime, and it should be life without parole. Now, interestingly, the district attorney very creatively got that same, is going for life without parole, but he has to prove that the death occurred in the course of a kidnapping. That's one of those special categories where you can have life without parole. So I don't think the DA should have to go through that, and you should be able to have that category.
And he would
as well.
probably agree with you.
I'm sure he would.
Take 30 seconds on this toughening up the DUI.
Well, Tiffany Heitkamp got killed in a boating accident.
Right.
And the person who crashed into her and killed her had previous DWIs driving a motor vehicle.
Correct.
I felt that it's kind of ridiculous. It shouldn't matter what kind of vehicle you're driving. If it's a second offense, it should go automatically up to a felony, and you have the higher consequences as far as sentencing. So I got a bill, the Tiffany Heitkamp bill, that would, no matter whether it's a boating or driving a car or whatever, the second offense should have the same consequences. We've passed in the Senate at least 8 years. The Assembly wouldn't do it. Bill Magnarelli's trying to get some type of compromise so that we can get this into law. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, all right, good luck with all of that. I won't ask you for a commitment now, but I hope I can get you back here to talk about things like Interstate 81, the Upstate Revitalization Initiative, and God knows 15 other things, but we'll try to get you back here another time.
I'm available.
Okay, Senator John Defrancisco, thank you very, very much for joining us here on Central. Good stuff. I wish I had more time, but again, we'll try to get you back here. That just about does it for this edition of Central. From all of us here at Fox 68 and My 43, I'm Daniel Pluff. Thanks for watching. New concerns regarding sports-related concussions in young adults. Will a merger of the county and city actually take place? The new amphitheater is done, Onondaga Lake is cleaner, and property taxes may be headed lower. Too good to be true? As he enters his 7th term in office, Onondaga County District Attorney Bill Fitzpatrick joins me live here in studio. Lawmakers recently passed an increase in New York State's minimum wage, which many feel is good for wage earners and our local economy. But others disagree. With his recently announced plans to retire, we're wondering, What's next? Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel Pluff. Welcome to this edition of Central. Glad to be back with you. And tonight we are talking some local issues, Central, if you will.
Join us every Sunday for Central on Fox 68 and My 43 as host J. Daniel Pluff sits down and interviews prominent members of the community about the important issues that affect Central New York. Asking the tough questions, getting the real answers. Tune in and see who Dan will sit down with next, and be sure to email the show at central@foxsyracuse.com with your questions and comments. Dan may read them on the air. Central every Sunday on Fox 68 and My 43.